This is my city, Lawrence, Massachusetts. It's mainly populated by Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, unlike the predominantly white towns around us. Growing up, I embraced the fact that most people spoke Spanish, how important the sense of community and culture was for us, and my city was beyond beautiful in my eyes. I knew that we were different, but I didn't realize what being different actually meant. All it took me was a small step outside of my little bubble.
Lawrence is described as the city of the damned. We are known to be ghetto and harsh and rude.
Run down, poor, drug infested.
Uneducated. Basically, you live here, you're gonna do like nothing with your life.
Anything pretty much that has to do with negativity is associated with coming from Lawrence.
Yeah, so I had a lot of issues at home, which, life happens. So theater was kind of my way of getting out of that, kind of like my way out of my own reality and the things that I had to face at home. And I worked while I was in school too, so it was very challenging to come out of school, come here, go to work like every day and working late, then getting homework done. But it wasn't impossible, especially when I do theater. It's something that I love to do, so no matter what, I always try my best.
And you don't notice this until you're like off stage and you're kind of reflecting, but theater is very relieving. I think theater heals. Like for me, I used to, finish school at 3:07 when it used to be 3:07, and we'd go right to rehearsal at 3:30, and we wouldn't go home till like 7 or 8, sometimes even later when it was dress rehearsal. And I'd be tired in the moment, but then I reflect and if I didn't have theater, I'd just kind of be a regular kid.
It's gonna get a little personal. I used to feel like I was nothing, but theater made me feel something. This is why I still do this, just to make me more. It gives me more confidence, and in turn I can give more people confidence. I can inspire more people.
Then can I say I couldn't get my mind off you all day? Now listen to me, that may be how you perceive it, but Nina, please believe that when you find your way again, you're gonna change the world, and then you're gonna brag and say I knew her way. This was a
I think theater impacts the Lawrence community in a large scale, particularly myself. It was kind of like a gateway to opening up to many opportunities, not only in Lawrence, but in college and beyond. And I always try to relate what I'm doing in the community now back to where I came from.
I mean, some terrible things may happen in the city, but that doesn't mean that everyone is terrible. We actually have a lot of wonderful art, and that impacts the artists to shine because they're always looked upon as this drug-infested or crime-infested city. So that takes a big part in the the manifestation of what we are as a city.
Theater is definitely essential for any kid growing up in Lawrence, just because it is a way for people to express themselves. With the new wave of artists and expressionists, it's the best way to incorporate almost every aspect of art. So there's theater that incorporates music, dance, art, scenery. It just incorporates everything that you want to do. You can find a place, a home in theater.
I always want people to walk away with something other than just a good time. I want people to walk away and be really impressed with what the students of Lawrence can do and what we can do as a community. I hate when people walk and say, "Oh, that show was so cute." I think you being in my program long ago, and that's what I always used to say. I hate when people say, "Oh, that was so cute." I like when people walk out and go, "I cannot believe those are high school kids. I cannot believe that was a high school show. I cannot believe that Lawrence did that," right? People come in with notoriously low standards when they come to see a Lawrence show. So what I want people to walk away from is a different perception of Lawrence and the kids in Lawrence, regardless of what show we do, whether we're doing like some really fun, flouncy musical, or whether we're doing Shakespeare, or whether we're doing a drama. Whatever we walk away with, the goal should always be that people walk away having a different opinion about the city. The city has been very challenging to do theater for. There are small little theater groups all over the place in the city. But I think the reality is it's when you struggle economically, when you struggle socially, and we've seen this for the last 10 years, that we have just seen a massive decline in people's attitudes towards people of color. I mean, it's always been there, but it's so much more public now. Why is theater important to you as a person who works 3 jobs, who has 3 kids, right? Who owns their own restaurant, who owns their own business? And why is it important for you to come see the high school shows? Why is it important for your kids to engage in that? So again, it's this really tough balance of saying this is so important because we're trying to educate people, we're trying to change the perception. But how do you balance supporting that and also supporting people that really struggle?
The way that I would describe it is that Lawrence, a lot of families in Lawrence do support the theater once they see it, come to fruition, see it happen. But it's also very hard for a lot of families to kind of accept that, their kids to go and do theater just because, they're thinking about paycheck to paycheck and how, these students should probably be working instead of, pursuing arts. So I feel like a lot of families here in Lawrence, who can't financially afford for students to come and do this for free all the time. It might be harder for them to understand theater.
And some of that is because of preconceived opinions about theater. We've had several parents come forward and say, "Oh, my son can't do that because if he does that, that means he's gay." We've had parents come forward and say, "My child can't do theater because they need to be home babysitting their brothers and sisters." There's just a lot of stuff that goes behind it.
It's unfortunate, because theater is an amazing and powerful thing. It's kind of what got me through my 4 years of high school.
It's always been my safe haven. And for anyone who feels lost, and because theater has been so much fun for me. And regardless of the bad rep or the good rep or any rep that theater gets, it's always going to give you a good message. It's always going to give you a good feeling and a second family.
For me, at least, and for my peers, I think we knew about theater growing up, especially like in middle school, but it wasn't until high school that we were actually exposed to it. And now I think the community is very active in the arts. And, if it wasn't for like our theater teachers in high school and, certain people around the community, we wouldn't have been exposed to the opportunities that we got from theater.
I started volunteering here when I was about 20, give or take, and I was working here full-time when I was 22. So I just finished my student teaching, and they hired me full-time to do both the Performing Arts Center management and tech directing, and to be the artistic director for this space. And so that's kind of why I ended up here, and I did want to teach. I didn't necessarily want to be a performer or do something else. I really loved art, kind of directing kids, music directing kids, teaching dance, and kind of watching kids grow from the kind of start of the process to the end of the process. I just knew I always wanted to do something with theater, and once I started directing, I really found that was really my passion. So this was my plan.
And I came along to help with costumes, and from there it just kind of flourished. I found my home helping organize rehearsals, helping organize what he needed help with. I really like working with students. I'd already been on the path to get my degree as a history teacher. And, it was just kind of one of those things where I knew it was something I really loved to do, and I'd kind of given up on it. And then he reminded me that I still really loved it and I shouldn't have given up.
When I started, I was very idealistic, and I didn't really understand. I understood the difficulties of growing up, poor, essentially, which a lot of students are, and growing up as a person of color in this community with the surrounding communities being the way they are. But I didn't really understand it from like a personal perspective, a one-on-one perspective, until I started working.
So I grew up in a very white town, and I've always felt that I was a pretty liberal person and pretty, not necessarily could relate, but aware of challenges that people of color faced. But Lawrence helped me face my own prejudices and helped me realize what students of color really needed to be successful. And it was eye-opening. And for me to be as aware as I was at 18, and then to have such an eye-opening revelation at 19 and 20 when I started, helping out there, really made me realize my own privileges and my own ignorances and the things that I needed to open my eyes to. So it was eye-opening, and I'm grateful for that knowledge all the time.
Matt and Jen were great. In high school, they were like our second pair of mom and dad. So we would joke around all the time and just say, hi, Mom, hi, Dad, how are you, blah, blah. So they were awesome.
Over time, they've kind of learned what it's like to work with us. And we just been so close to them and so open to them, and they've been here for so long that they understand, like, they're like our parents, you know what I'm saying, our adopted parents. And they came in very well aware about what our community is and the people in it. So I feel like because they came so open-mindedly and they were willing to like understand and kind of learn.
When I started my master's program at Emerson, a lot of things started to click in for me about how privileged I was as a non-person of color and working in this district. So it was really important to me that it wasn't some white person coming in to fix the problems of the inner city, is that, we build a community. So we start from the ground up and we build a community with the students. And the students have a voice, have a say, and I don't sit here and pretend to have lived that life.
And that's why I make fun of being white a lot, to try to break down some of that uncomfortableness when people acknowledge it. I always joke and say I'm the white mommy that you didn't want. And I try to make everyone laugh. It's not my job to save anyone. It's my job to help give the tools that the students need to become successful adults.
Their support went far beyond the stage and performances. They definitely worried about how we were doing at home, what we ate, are you being healthy, are you making the right choices. They definitely went above and beyond to make sure that we were supported in every aspect of our lives, not just the theater and what they were getting paid for. It was like our entire lives. They wanted to make sure that we were good on.
I want to make sure that I'm not putting my white ignorance on top of their experience. That's very important to me. I try really hard to make sure that the students of any skin color are learning valuable techniques to help them become successful adults. But, working in an urban setting, my first priority is always making sure that the students feel safe and happy and are fed and have all the things that they need. And then the next layer of it for me is always making sure that I don't impose any systemic racism on them. And that's not even, I think that, like I just said, I think I've come a really far way from who I was at 18. But there are still little pieces in the theater world that can be overlooked very easily. And I try really hard to be very aware of them, like lighting and makeup and costuming. I try really hard to be aware of the differences and be respectful of them.
Back in high school, I think that, I wouldn't have been so academically successful if I didn't have theater in my life. I mean, just putting emotions aside, like statistics prove that, like, immersing yourself in the arts, students who immerse themselves in the arts tend to score higher on test scores and things like that. And I think that, like, communities like Lawrence, where they're underfunded, under-resourced, they don't get those opportunities, and therefore they're, losing. When you don't have the arts and you don't have, expressive and creative outlet for students, then that's going to be felt in academics. They're going to start doing more poorly on their exams and things like that. So from that end, I think that theater is very important. But then also just understanding that, like, theater is not meant for white people. Theater should be open to everyone.
I don't want to get political, but it's predominantly a white, thing, a white profession, white male, or white female. Not a lot of minorities get the roles that they want. Instead they're just pushed aside and not recognized for true, hard work and dedication, rather than just, being a specific type of shade on your skin. It's just sad.
Well, they're kind of typecast in a very specific role, whether that's, quote, ghetto or criminal or, over the top, kind of feeding into the stereotype of loud and, kind of the standout, if you will. They're not given as many opportunities for advancement, and you kind of see them in the same sort of spaces. And if you see them in, like, TV shows and stuff, their sort of rhetoric and the lines that they're given, if they are given lines, just perpetuate the stereotype.
People of color, communities of color are underrepresented when it comes to theater and when it comes to acting. And so, I mean, although I'm not pursuing acting as a profession, I do think that it's really difficult even trying to pursue it, more recreationally and just doing it for fun and leisure. So, yeah, I think there's just a lot of different kind of feelings and emotions and experiences that go into it. And, we're kind of limited to, usually we're just limited to either the caricatures, of our communities, or we're limited to just like POC dominated shows. And so those are very limited, there are not many of them, which makes it really difficult for students to kind of pursue theater or pursue acting.
I definitely think we face the most challenges out of everyone. Like, there aren't enough roles for people of color. A lot of opportunities aren't given to people of colors. Roles that are made for people of color are given to people that are not people of color. So it's just a long list of short ends.
We just wrapped up the Bernstein Centennial this weekend, and we went and performed for the Mass Cultural Council, and somebody, one of the head theater educators at Tufts asked, how do you feel about doing a Bernstein show or West Side Story show, which is written by four, white guys? And I don't think the story is lost. I think when you have people of color playing the actual roles that they're being portrayed in, yeah, it's a little antiquated, but what's the mission? What's the goal? And if the goal is to change people's perspectives, right, and to move this country forward, with, it's a scary time, I think, for people of color. It's a very scary time for Latinos in this country. And so if the goal is to move that forward, I think sometimes you have to take a step back and see what the intention is and see how close you're reaching that goal. But yeah, it has to kind of start with student work, I think. And if you do have a piece that isn't student work, you have to make sure it's achieving that goal. Or, what is the point? It's just a bunch of white people trying to tell a story that they don't really fully understand.
So what you're about to see is in the Heights. This is not a Bernstein show. And so what we've done is actually, we didn't want to just celebrate Bernstein as a musician. Obviously, he's one of the most quintessential composers of the 20th century. But we wanted to kind of celebrate him as a human being, as a person, as a social activist, and as an educator. So what we've done is we've actually produced In the Heights to put alongside West Side Story. So this is going to be set in the same neighborhood, 50 years apart. So if you stay tonight to see our closing production of West Side Story, you'll notice that the buildings are the same, except the shops have changed, the people have changed. So it's hopefully going to spur some discussion and some conversation with you and everybody in your communities in the whole Merrimack Valley about where we were 50 years ago, where we are now, and where we have to go as a community to make it better for everyone that lives here. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for supporting, and we'll be hanging out after the show if you'd like to talk to us. Thank you for coming.
So our goals to be allies meant dealing with some very challenging issues during Bernstein. Very challenging. First of all, we couldn't get anyone to audition because it was in Lawrence. So no kid from North Andover, Methuen wanted to audition, which also meant that no white population wanted to audition. And it was a stark reminder of the amount of racism the kids in Lawrence face every single day. And there are white children who go to that school too. It's kids of all color. It's the community itself that people hear the word Lawrence and they get scared. So no one wanted to audition for this show. We had to beg people to the point that we were filling roles 2 weeks before we went up. So once we got people there, our mission was to identify that this amazing musician came from Lawrence, that there are so many good things that come out of Lawrence. That Lawrence is not just a city of sin filled with horrible stories that you only see on the news. There are so many amazing things that come out of that city. So that was our first goal, is to enlighten people that Lawrence is more than this scary city that is portrayed on Fox 25 News.
I just think Lawrence is a very special place, period, right? I just graduated from Skidmore College and I spent 4 years in upstate New York, and I think that and I've traveled the world, I've studied abroad in different places, and I just feel like Lawrence, there's something about Lawrence that kind of always brings me back. And I think performing here, specifically doing the show, just the amount of talent, I think is constantly going unnoticed. There's so much talent in terms of singing, in terms of acting that goes on here. But then also just kind of the community that we build. I think it's a lot different. Yeah, theater companies, get close, and that's that's needed, to put on a successful play or a successful production. But I think that there's a difference in kind of how those relationships are built. I think that with and this is not just Lawrence, but also maybe communities of color more generally, is that there's an understanding that these opportunities are don't come to us often, right? This might be a once in a lifetime chance, and so we kind of take advantage of that. We take advantage of the fact that we are in this moment, kind of doing this thing that's not given to many people, and we make the most of it. And so that's where I feel like a lot of our kind of understanding and our passion comes from, is this kind of consensual and I guess across the board kind of understanding that this is not going to happen again for us.
This is a show that I've wanted to do for 5 years. I love West Side Story so much. It's one of my favorites. And I really thought we were going to do so many great social justice moments. These, even if they were backstage, even if they weren't on stage. We struggled. We struggled so hard. It just really reminded us just the state that our nation is in right now, and the fact that just because there's people under the age of 25, just because they're young doesn't mean that they're woke. Doesn't mean they're aware. So we had one night where Matt actually broke down in tears talking to the cast and told all the people who were playing the Jets, who were all the white people, you don't get it. You don't see what all of these people who are playing Sharks deal with all the time. You don't see how much this show is about racism.
You cross the line once too often. Oh, who jumped A-Rab this afternoon?
Who jumped me the first day I moved here?
Who asked you to move here? Who asked you?
Move where you want.
Go back to where you came from.
Fix, mates!
I think innately there is a message that's kind of delivered when you have, an all Latino cast. We're doing something like Little Shop of Horrors, and does that change the message or doesn't that change the message? And I think that's just that much is an interesting debate to have. Like when we did, Shakespeare, we've done Oedipus, we had a female Latino Oedipus. What does that say? Does it say anything? And I think that's kind of up to have, I think that's where we'd like to have some debate, right? Because it doesn't really work the other way, right? If we're doing, I know, a local school district just did In the Heights, and they are very suburban, very white, and they had an Asian Usnavi, and I heard that the director was quoted in saying, I think Lin-Manuel wrote this, for anybody to play Usnavi, and, talk about their experiences, and I don't think that's true. I think it's written for a Latino community to perform, but I think, if you do another show, like a Little Shop or, whatever, and they're not necessarily, I think the idea that they're white is maybe just a cultural idea. I don't think it's necessarily 100% the reality. I think you can put a Latino or someone who's Asian in a part, and just because it doesn't specify, their race doesn't mean, or even gender, doesn't mean that it has to be played that way. I think that's kind of our mentality, is that, okay, we see Little Shop of Horrors, everyone's white. Well, why is everybody white? Is everyone white because that's the way we've always seen it? You see the movie and you see the current culture, and that everyone just assumes they're white. They don't necessarily have to be white. I think there are parts there written that it would be a little strange. I think having a white Usnavi is a little strange, right? He's talking about Latino culture. He's talking about, being Latino, living Latino, immigrating. So I think it makes much more sense to have someone of color play those roles.
Ooh, smooth operator out there she goes. Yo, bro, take 5, take a walk outside. You look exhausted. Lost, don't let life slide. The whole hood is struggling, yeah, times are tight, and you're stuck to this corner like a street light. Yeah, I'm a street light, choking on the heat. The world spins around while I'm frozen to my seat. The people that I know will keep on rolling down the street. But every day is different, so I'm switching up the beat. Cause my parents came with nothing. They got a little more to show apart. But yo, at least we got the store. It's all about the legacy they left with me. It's destiny, and one day I'll be on a beach, sunny, writing checks to me.
In high school, I didn't think about performing as a person of color because everyone around me was a person of color. In our situation, it was more difficult to fill in roles that weren't people of color.
For a long time, it's just I was acting to act. I was acting because I was doing it. But now with things going on, I do see why being a person of color as an actor is important. And I've been trying to understand that and definitely get that through my head, what it means to be a person of color and an actor.
I want to increase representation for students of color, people of color, in productions, in whatever kind of, I guess, artistic expression or outlet that I pursue. I think that with students of color, it's really difficult because you don't see a lot of people of color on stage. So when I enter, when I do theater, when I do something similar, I'm always kind of thinking, all right, so, who am I going to be, what audience am I tapping into? Do I have the opportunity to kind of, touch someone who looks like me? And I think that's like really important, is that in everything that I kind of pursue, I make sure that I'm kind of paving the way for other people to do it too. It shouldn't just be me, kind of doing it. I want to be that token. I want it to be that, this opportunity that I have is also given to people after me.
I think you really need to step back and take a look at some of the shows that you pick and say, does this person have to be white, or is this just my perception that this person has to be white? The same thing with movies, right? We talk about, whitewashing movies and kind of movie culture. And you really need good casting directors, because there's no assumption that a lot of these characters that get put up on stage are white. They just, or on stage, or in a film are white, but a lot of white male casting directors just assume that that's the person because that's what they know. So when you put somebody of color into those positions or move them up into those positions, all of a sudden that kind of broadens, a movie's perspective. And the same thing with theater, right? Kind of broadens the theater perspective. Does that person have to be white? Right? So I think that's more so the question, is like looking at shows and saying, there's some really antiquated shows, right? Anything Goes is incredibly antiquated and fairly racist. So maybe that's not a show you pick with the high schoolers, but a show like Little Shop, which there's a lot of fun and some great music and great skills to build. Do they have to be white? Is it a white cultured show that you can't put a Latino in a part because it has to be a white person? And you really need to have that debate in your head. What is the reality there?
You didn't have nothing till you met me. Come on, kid, what'll it be? Money? Girls? One particular girl. How about that Audrey? Think it over. There must be someone you could 86, real quiet like, and give me some lunch. How's about a room at the Ritz, wrapped in velvet, covered in galets? Little Nookie gonna clean up your tits and you'll get it.
I let a lot of the decisions and the decision making up to the students about what we do for shows, how we interact or with other communities, what projects we work on, and we build it up that way. So really it's not necessarily a top-down model, it's really a bottom-up model. And that tends to give those kids more representation when we do shows. Like when we had done Circle Game, which was a show we've written about domestic violence and about stereotyping of urban kids, all real stories from students that we've had in the past, and we wrote it and we did it a couple different years. We brought it to the Fringe Festival the first time we went in Scotland, but it was really student-driven work, and it was a way for them to use theater as a conduit to explain their personal stories, and I was more of a facilitator in that. The show opens with Joni Mitchell's song "The Circle Game," and you see this student, kind of presumably a person of color, in a hoodie, and 4 police officers come out and they beat him to death and they drag him off stage, and it's all in silhouette and it's set to this folk music.
I remember he cared more about Gabby than I did.
I remember the fight.
I remember the first time he told me he loved me.
I remember the day he was born.
I remember losing my patience with him.
He had to stay strong.
It was all his fault.
I never realized how serious our relationship was.
He protected you to decide.
Then we're stuck in a loop.
He doesn't talk to me anymore. He was a good son.
What would you expect from a kid like that?
He was such a good.
We kind of hit rewind and find out that he was actually a really good kid. He was just completely stereotyped by his hoodie, which is not an unrealistic storyline, which we've seen as a country. We saw how caring and loving he was. It was one of the most depressing things we've ever written, but it was depressing because it was true.
And I think it was a really powerful image. And this was, 2010. This was 8 years ago, before kind of the media boom of what happens in a lot of people's daily lives, a lot of urban people's daily lives kind of out there in the open. So I think it was really kind of progressive in that way, where a lot of the North Andover and Andover kids didn't really equate that to reality. That's something you saw on Law and Order. That's something you saw on TV. That's not something you knew people who experienced that prejudice. So the first time we wrote it, we brought it to the Massachusetts Guild Festival, where we had incredible response. We had a standing ovation. We had a lot of the North Andover kids, which are again they're our neighbors, come up and say, "Man, we do stereotype a lot of kids." We made it to semifinals, and we had two white private school teachers judge the semifinals, and they wrote some horrendously racist things in our judges' feedback, where they had said these issues don't really happen in modern schools, and then a lot of the scene was kind of pantomimed, and so there wasn't necessarily a lot of props. And there was one scene where we have two girls, again two Latino girls, presumably trying on makeup, and they're supposed to be at Sephora, and they're having kind of girl talking back and forth about trying on makeup. And, the judges wrote about the scene where the girls are stealing things.
Oh, hey, let's go get some makeup. Oh, this is my coat?
Gabby, don't put that on. Do you know how many other people put on that tester?
Yeah, that's why they're here, to try on for. Alright, I'm gonna try it on. Come up there. I mean, look at these eyeshadows. This is your color, and your purple. Really?
Gabby, stop. You know I don't wear makeup.
Hey, what's your problem? We come out to have a good time together. Now just try this on. Maybe if you wore more makeup, you could impress other guys.
Why would I need to impress other guys?
Well, Ramona, I just don't think you and Victor work together. Tu sabe, you're going places, Ramona. Victor, he's just bringing you down.
So they're watching a scene that has nothing to do with that, but they see the color of their skin, they see what they're wearing, and they automatically make that presumption. And then we see, and then they gave all the kids awards for having ghetto fabulous costumes, and they use the word ghetto fabulous in front of an entire crowd of people. All the costumes were things that from these kids' closets, and Jen did a nice job kind of formulating it all together with what we had, so it all kind of matched and worked as a unit. But these are kids' closets. This isn't something that we stylized or made up. These were just hoodies and jeans and shirts.
The audience that usually will come to our shows is our family and our friends. While if I perform outside of Lawrence, I don't know how these people will react to me. I don't know if they'll like the way that I do something, if they like the way that I speak, if I have an accent, or if I bother them in some way. Just because I've been to places where coming from Lawrence, like, we were annoying, or like we were ghetto fabulous, as we were told once. So it makes me a little more nervous to go and perform for an audience that I don't know versus somebody that I know is in my community, that understands my culture, that understands the way that I talk and that attitude, and also like everything that makes me me.
I guess when people from Lawrence see shows that are done in Lawrence, they have a reaction that's great. It comes more from the heart, I would say, definitely. Like, obviously, when you go to other places and you're performing and there's audience members reacting, I guess they react more like, oh yeah, we knew what the show was about, we knew what's happening. But when somebody from Lawrence sees a show, it's more like, it touched me. Even if it's like a show that's like not a show that's supposed to be deep, but the parent sees their kids doing something they love and they're like, wow.
Not only because I'm from Lawrence, but
I think you just feel at home, and you feel like that's where you can give the best performance possible, because you're doing it not only for yourself, for your peers, but you're doing it for your city. And you're trying to either whatever your message is, break down the stereotype or put yourself on the map or make a name for yourself, or Latinx people or people of color in general. I think there's something like performing at home, as cliche as that sounds, because you know that you're going to get sort of the feedback that you want, versus if you're performing elsewhere, folks aren't able to relate to you more because they don't know the history of where you're like performing and coming from.
Those places don't give me the same feeling as doing it in your hometown and really giving back to what made you.
Yeah, we do our musicals, we do all those other things, and we do Shakespeare, but there's always that underlying, level of students first.
Like, we've done so much technically and theatrically. Shrek is still probably one of my favorite musicals we've ever done, because it was just so beautiful, and the costumes and the set and everything was amazing. But as far as life-changing and things that I'm going to remember when I'm very old and not doing this anymore, it's going to be Circle Game. That was the best thing we've ever done.
I didn't say, we're going to write this show about, stereotyping urban kids, and I wrote this great script and we're going to use it.
I didn't impose my story upon someone else's story. I just collected the stories we'd heard and strung them together, and then tried really hard to make sure I wasn't putting any of my own privilege in the storyline.
I said, what stories do you want to tell? And yes, we helped them edit, we helped them clean up the storyline, we helped create an overarching story arc, but we didn't, though the individual words were really kid-based. They really came from students and their personal experiences.
It means my attempt at trying to help someone tell their story, and I know in my heart that we all as a team helped effectively at least make people question their opinions.
Victor, I just got your letter. Who is this? Yes, this is she. Yes, I'm family. What's going on? Arrested for what? The hospital. Is he okay? Can I see him? No, you don't understand. I need to see him. I need to know he's okay. What happened to Victor? Is he gone? No. No, he can't. No, he can't be gone.
You got hit because you deserved it. Mothers on welfare are just lazy. Domestic abuse only happens in poverty-stricken homes.
Inner city girls are just teen moms in the making.
Your parents are high school dropouts because they had you.
Get a job. It's not that hard.
Gang members are just drug-dealing killers.
And this is where your tax dollars are being wasted.
Every time you watch the news, pick up a newspaper, read a magazine, or walk into a new city, ask yourself, are your judgments keeping us in our circle?
it's why I've stayed in Lawrence. I care about students that I think other people might not give the time and energy to. But I do really wrestle with the fact that I don't want to appear like an egotistical white person who thinks she knows better, because I don't. And I've learned so much from my students in Lawrence, and I've changed so profoundly by being there that I feel like they've taught me just as much as I've taught them. It's really hard because I feel like, and I know some people are going to be really irritated about this response, but I feel like it's my responsibility to use my voice to be an ally. And I feel like sometimes that might come across as unintentional white saviorism, but that is not my goal. My goal is to use my voice and my position in this world to help support my students. I mean, I work specifically with the student population.
This is the toughest job I've ever had. This is not a white savior complex. My wife and I have made a lot of sacrifices to even keep this program running. I could get a job at a suburban school like that and have 10 times the amount of support that I have here. 10 times the amount of support and funding. I choose to work here, and I choose to deal with all the difficulties and the struggles of this program because I see the impact it can have on kids, and I can see the changes it can have on kids, and I see kids coming back over and over again, waking up to the idea that they aren't treated fairly in this world, and they can do something about it. Where I think we see a lot of people who are treated unfairly in this world and don't think they can do anything about it. So, it's just a lifestyle choice to sacrifice a lot of stuff. I have kids now, and I watch them sacrificing stuff because I believe in, equality for all people, regardless of their skin color, economic level. I believe that every kid should have a chance to be themselves, be on stage, regardless of how much money they have in their pocket or how much their family has.
It is great to have sometimes people from outside perspectives come into an inner city and see it for themselves. But I do think inner cities need people who come from the inner cities, make it, achieve goals for themselves, and then come back and teach them, hey, I've been through this. I know what I'm going through. I know what you're going through. And I learned from it. I pushed through. I got an education. Now I want to share it with you. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but I do believe that to teach in an inner city, you should know what an inner city goes through. But I do believe also that people from other cities, other towns, they could bring so much to urban communities and teach them.
The goal is to educate people, to train people, and have them come back and do this work with me. We have, you look at our choreographers, when we bring in help, all former students, people of color. I don't see anybody else clamoring for this job. So, if there's a person of color who wants this job, from the community, we bring them in. If someone says, I want to help, I want to be part of this, we bring them in. We have them work with kids, we train them, and we give back that way too. But it is challenging because there are some people that think that. And I think there are some people that act that way on the other end of it. I think there are some people that say, I'm here for me. I'm not really here for me. The school doesn't necessarily appreciate what I do or the amount of money I spent. I just spent $10,000 on the Bernstein Centennial because somebody blew us off, including vendors in the city who said, we're going to donate stuff, and then never came through. That's not something I sit here and advertise, or I sit here and say to, the paper, look at me, I'm donating money. But, my wife and I put off our wedding for a couple years. We put off buying a house for a couple years because I believe in what we're doing for kids. I can see a change in a community with the work that we're doing, but it's not necessarily for the glory of it all.
I want to be a true ally. You know what I mean? I've been in Lawrence for 10 years now, and I've learned so much about what an actual ally looks like. And an actual ally is not someone who's doing stuff and helping for their own good. An actual ally is saying, no, I want to hear your story. I'm going to listen to you. I'm not going to disrespect you. I'm not going to talk down to you. I'm not going to patronize you. But then let's work together to resolve an issue. I think that sometimes the innate cultural differences make people uncomfortable. And so what they do is they just try to either wipe it away or try to resolve one small piece of it and say, I did my part. That's not how I look at things.
Like, I don't see them as the white saviors, you know? I just see them as people who would do what they love. You know what I mean? And you can tell that a lot from people. There are people who have that complex, the white saviors complex. And there are people who just love to do what they love, and you can clearly see it in Matt and Jen. You know, they love what they do, you know, and they love doing it, you know? So I don't see a white savior complex on them. And it's not even like a brown nosing thing or anything. It's just that I see truth. And the truth is they love what they do.
I think it requires some extent of research to know what the community of Lawrence is about, what you're diving into, what you might expect versus what your kind of perceptions of the city may be diminished, because it's not really until you get inside the city and immerse yourself into Lawrence that you don't really know what it's like. It's a city that thrives, a city that, you know, shoots for excellence in all areas and not just, you know, jobs or trying to, you know, drop the crime rate. Like, we're thriving in so many areas. And I think if you can become a contributing partner of the community, then that's the first step.
I think it's really important as a white person that you learn when to shut up, because there are plenty of times where you need to just shut up and let someone else talk and not try to alleviate your guilt for things that you or your family or your ancestors did by saying, well, I have 3 gay friends, a black friend, a Latino friend, and an Asian friend. No, like that doesn't mean that you're being a good ally.
You know, I feel like a lot of people who are Caucasian and come into an inner city, they come in with, oh, I know they have baggage, I know they have damage, but I'm still gonna do it. And it's like, I feel like they should understand what's actually going on in their life, how that affects them, what they have to go through, you know, because it's not always the same thing. Every child is different here. There's kids who go home and have to be a mom and dad to their siblings. There are kids who go home and have to work to take care of their parents. So I feel like people who are white just need to understand what happens in this city, what goes on, to better themselves and better the kids they're working with. Because a lot of teachers come in and they go, well, my mom was sick once and I got through it.
An ally is being aware of the fact that you have different experiences, but you can be supportive without allowing your experiences to take control. So for me, when I say ally, I'm thinking, you know, I grew up in a low-income home that didn't have a lot of money, and I lived in a trailer for part of my life. So when I first started, it was hard for me sometimes not to keep referring back to my own feelings or memories of what it was like to live in poverty. But I learned very quickly that the definition of poverty looked very different in Lawrence. I might be a woman who struggles with so many different things, and I might have grown up poor, but I didn't grow up as a poor woman of color or a man of color who's gay. Or, I mean, come on, like the list could go on forever and ever. So my job is to be supportive and not try to use their moment to tell my story, and be there to help in whichever way I can when that is asked. Yeah, there is just some things that I don't have a right to talk about, and I don't have a right to have an opinion about. So I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to vote for the people to have the right to do what they want to do with their bodies and whatever, or whomever. My only job is to stand here and say, yes, you should have the same rights that I have.
I encourage people from the outside world or Caucasians to come and work with us, because then they understand what it's like to be in our community, understand where we come from and why we do things the way we do. It's better to have people come and help you and kind of see what it's like to be in your situation, because they can be more understanding. It's hard sometimes to work with people who don't understand, like, you know, your culture, because you're like, hey, no, don't say that, or hey, don't do, you know what I'm saying? But it's a good learning experience for people of color and for people who are not of color, because you get to know why they are the way they are and how they grew up, and vice versa. So I think it's important for us to come together as different communities and do things like this. Is very helpful.
The message that I try to project is just do what you love, regardless of your color, your shape, size, whatever. Just do what you love regardless. Because, you know, we live in a world where we're taught fear, you know, fear the unknown. You know, I'd say just go at the unknown and try to understand it, because you know, with knowledge there is power, and pain is a powerful lesson. But regardless, you learn, you know, and it's wonderful to just be able to do this, you know, not only just act, but just be in the arts. It's amazing.
Really, nothing is fair right now, and all we can do is show kindness, because we have that as human beings. We can provide kindness no matter what we're going through. We can pull people in and say, hey, I got you, and I'm here for you. And if anyone coming from outside in, the message that I want to give them is, we're not bad people. Bad things might happen, we might make mistakes, but that doesn't make us any less human. And we're here for you. Even if you don't like us, we're still gonna care for you, because that's all we can do right now.
We just love each other. We treat each other like a family. I feel like that's the deciding factor, because it's not necessarily like, oh, these kids we have to help, and no, they're basically our kids.
You have to find a fine line, if you're going to be a teacher specifically, between treating your students as if they were your own children, but also remembering that they are not your own children. So my approach is to walk in with an open mind, because you will learn so much if you are willing to challenge your own beliefs and preconceived notions of what it's like to work in an urban community.
I think a message for people outside of Lawrence is we don't need a savior. I think that as a population, as a community, as the families that we are capable of going far beyond what we are now. And I don't believe that having saviors is a necessity, or that you need to come in and fix us or fix the city.
You have to listen to the community. You have to see what they need. It's not necessarily about what you need. What kind of shows are valuable at the time, what kind of work is valuable at the time, and where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, where you're going to get the most impact for your energy. I think that's just something you really have to think it all out. You really have to think it all out and enjoy what you do, and realize that when you go home, you've made a difference in a lot of kids' lives.
And the best way to avoid white savior complex is to constantly ask yourself, am I doing this for them, or am I doing this for me? There are some days where you are seeing some really horrible situations, and you have to figure out how to be helpful and be an ally, and not be judgmental or a savior.
Some tips that I have for people of color who are actors is just to love your skin, love what you do, love who you do it for.
And it doesn't matter if you're purple, green, yellow, doesn't matter what color you are, just love what you do, and love it enough so that you can make it your life. Yeah, there's gonna be voices everywhere telling you that you can't do this, can't do that, but at the end of the day, it's your voice that matters. Be the change you want in the world.
Really, I can only say two things. One is never give up, even if you feel down, even if you feel oppressed. Everything is in the mind. Everything besides what you have planned does not matter. And just go for it. No one can stop you. Just go for it.
Your self-respect and who you are and what you represent is always most important. It's the most important thing.
Embrace your community, your kind of background and where you come from, and use that to fuel your passion for theater.
Definitely don't let anybody underestimate you and the things that you are capable of doing. Don't let anybody put you in a box.
So I would say to stay true to who you are, break down those stereotypes if you can. Don't try to become victim of someone who's typecast. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to be bold and challenge the system because it wasn't built for you. And so you have to kind of make your own system and bring your peers along. And I think if you have, the talent, the will, the courage, the tenacity, the determination, you'd be able to do that.
Outsiders may view communities like Lawrence as dangerous and hopeless, but I see it as a place that can harness our oppression, hardships, and struggles, which will manifest itself into something powerful, beautiful, and beyond our stereotypes. We will change the world.